Welcome to The Virtual Shift, a show looking at the seismic changes happening in healthcare with virtual care at the epicenter. Join me and my guests as we look at key cultural and policy shifts impacting how providers, payers, and patients connect, as well as how care is being reimagined both for today and the future. Hello, and thanks for tuning in today. I'm your host, Tom Foley. You can learn more about this show by visiting the program on healthcarenowradio.com, and be sure to follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter @FoleyTom, and the hashtag The Virtual Shift. Today we have a great guest on, Randy Erspamer, Commercial Director of Growth for Chronomics. Randy, welcome to the program.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here today.
Awesome. So, Randy, I'm very interested in what you do at Chronomics and overall what Chronomics is doing. This is about the virtual shift. So, and I believe you guys are generating a huge shift in the market in the context of focusing in on the home and services in the home. So tell us a little bit about Chronomics and what you mean, and then ultimately what you mean by what a bio infrastructure is.
Sure, happy to. Thanks, Tom, for the kind words, first of all. So at Chronomics, at the most basic level, our mission is to make the unseen actionable, or really be able to allow individuals from all different socioeconomic conditions and geographies to be able to query and access their biology via lab diagnostics that are available at the home. Maybe it's a little helpful to give some context of how we got started and where we are today to see our journey. And I think it's also reflective of where the overall market is going. So Chronomics, we were founded in 2017, originally as an epigenetics company by a group of 5 scientists in the UK, all from Cambridge and Oxford, epigeneticists by trade. And then when COVID happened in 2020, COVID-19, actually, we pivoted a little bit. We already had a tech platform with a series of APIs and our own SDK to facilitate our epigenetics testing to look at biological age and how lifestyle choices can affect your DNA signature. And we pivoted and actually developed the first saliva-based SARS-CoV-2 assay in the European Union. And our tech platform enabled us to provide health certificates to individuals that were traveling internationally. So we enjoyed a nice boom of business and were able to help out pretty significantly in the COVID pandemic to allow some life to continue for people to be able to travel with a negative test. And since then, we've come out of the pandemic realizing that our tech platform can be used agnostically across different types of tests, whether it be a heart health panel, an energy and overall wellness panel, oncology screening. It really doesn't matter as long as the science is there for a test to be collected. It can be run through our platform using a unique identification code. And we've really grown the platform since then. So we've trademarked the term bioinfrastructure to show like what we are doing today as we pivot out of a post-COVID pandemic world. And what that really means is that we're using our tech platform, or as we've dubbed ourselves, a tech bio company, flipping the nomenclature a little bit, because we're using tech to be able to query and access your diagnostic result. And our tech is the connective tissue to really be able to link together the technology side of things, laboratories that are CDC CLIA certified or CAP accredited based off of geography, as well as providing the supply chain and logistics to be able to simplify and speed up the entire process of bringing a lab result to an individual. Before, or even today, if you go outside of the context of using tech to do this, it is quite cumbersome to bring up lab diagnostics to the individual, especially in like rural areas of the United States or elsewhere. So really, this is enabling us to be able to bring this faster and more readily available to all levels of individuals.
So talk to me a little bit about the stigma associated with doing lab kits, if you will, into the home, right? There's typically, hey, let me send the phlebotomist out or have the patient go to the local clinic to collect the sample, things of that nature. But you operate in a different manner. You certainly support the phlebotomist going to the home where certain tests require such a resource, but you ultimately do ship kits where the sample is collected in the home and then it's shipped back. So talk to me about the stigma of ordering such a type of a kit and and whether there's any differentiation in the quality of the diagnosis or the examination of that sample?
Yeah, great question, Tom. So first, you hit nail on head, right? So we saw during the COVID pandemic from a McKinsey report, there was a 38x increase in telehealth visits. It went up to 82x as a metric I saw, and it stabilized at 38x. And we saw everyone, or many people, became very comfortable with taking an at-home diagnostic via SARS-CoV-2, or taking a self-test for COVID-19. And the quality was there through the FDA. So we saw emergency use authorizations. Each test was vetted very carefully through the FDA in a expedited fashion for the emergency use authorization, but still going through a very rigorous process to ensure the quality was there. And now the public is more comfortable with taking at-home diagnostics. So if you would have asked someone in 2018 if they were comfortable taking a blood test, the answer from a preponderance of people would probably have been no. Today, people are more comfortable with taking at-home diagnostic, and across the board, where science will allow us to maintain the same quality as a venous blood draw or collecting urine at an at-home or a brick and mortar phlebotomy station, the quality is still going to be there due to the same rigorous standards, right? So in some instances, the self-collection device is FDA cleared for that test type. In the instances that it's not, laboratories have the authority to validate it as a lab-developed test if they see that it fits a need. And that's going to go through a very rigorous process where they're going to have a control sample. They're going to have a certain amount of specimens that they're going to analyze versus whatever method that's already been validated or cleared by the FDA. They're going to do a usability study to ensure that the average layman can process the test and take it appropriately as a reasonable person would, based off the instructions for use and the directions that are indicated there. And then finally, a stability study is going to be done as well to ensure that from the individual taking the test to shipping it to the laboratory, and the laboratory then processing the test, that it's going to be, again, concordant with whatever the phlebotomy draw would have been if it was a venous blood draw, for example. So all of these rigorous standards are still being applied for at-home collection. And if for whatever reason the science won't allow us to do it, so in the example of like AST for a liver enzyme, the scientific community agrees that that test is not appropriate for at-home collection at this time because the science isn't there yet. That's a test that we'll do via mobile phlebotomy or brick and mortar phlebotomy. So there are instances where some tests have to be performed that way, but technology is speeding up very quickly. There's new collection devices that are available. And I think the future is where we'll see that a majority of tests can be done at home. And that's what we tie into our bioinfrastructure network.
Well, in the end, there's a couple of points that you made there. The samples are still being processed through the same certified labs that a phlebotomist would use from a certification perspective, right? So they're still being processed through the same back-end quality system, if you will, right? And on the front end, you're only doing kits without a phlebotomist, if you will, where it makes sense and where science supports it. You're not winging it, as some might say or classify it. You're very structured and concise in what works, what doesn't work, but yet providing that full class of service to be able to help a health system provide at-home sample collection. Did I get that right?
Yeah, exactly. And at Chronomics and any company that's trying to do at-home diagnostics, it's very important to have that high level of scrutiny on deciding if you do a test at home versus via phlebotomy, because at the end of the day, it has serious implications on health and life, right? So it's important that we get it right. And at our company, we vet it through a team of PhDs and MDs that we have on staff to ensure that we're making the appropriate clinical decisions on what test types are being done via what collection method.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the rigor, frankly, because sometimes when there's new technology on the market and maybe it's more software oriented, there's a perspective sometimes that the technical phrase that I used earlier was winging it. So there's a lack of trust in a new approach. But here you come out of the gate saying, yeah, we would agree. This doesn't make sense in some scenarios. We know that, and we're telling you that up front. So there's full transparency. But at the same time, you are working diligently on building that trust in that what does work can scale, right? So it's just like anything else. Before COVID, telehealth was really not. It was used, but it was, a thought, a nice to have, not a must have. And then over time, as the demand rose, we have now a new industry, not just in telehealth, but remote patient monitoring, therapeutic monitoring, and chronic care management, all being virtual services to some degree. So that's all good. So, and at the end of the day, health systems, in my view, need to start thinking about their resource crunch. We hear it more and more post-COVID than we heard pre-COVID, and that they just don't have the resources available to handle the influx of what's coming into the brick and mortar. And as well, they don't have, and they have burnout for those that are of those resources that are there. So a service like yours actually does allow them to extend their clinical services to the home, leveraging the best of all worlds, right? Leveraging the best of what you do and reaching into the home, and leveraging the brick and mortar for the best of what a provider can do. Ultimately, the balance is what needs to change if we're really truly going to reimagine the delivery of care. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, Tom. As I mentioned, like we're seeing this heavy increase in demand post-COVID of at-home care. People are becoming more comfortable with using technology to call a physician via video chat and receive a prescription via mail. So if the provider will prescribe a medication, there's last mile delivery services. They can get it sent to them via UPS or FedEx and receive the prescription. But what we found is that the diagnostic is lagging behind prescriptions and the access to physicians via tech platforms. And when it comes to like tequity, if you've heard that term before, of being able to create healthcare equity across all socioeconomic conditions, all geographies, it's really important that diagnostics catches up with the rest of the healthcare continuum, or the continuum of care. Because at the end of the day, 70% of medical decisions are based on a lab result. So any diagnosis, or most diagnoses, I should say, are based off of a lab result. And we need to make sure that lab results are readily available to the general population, from value-based care to acute care and across the board. Because at the end of the day, the US healthcare system, a lot of people know that it's extremely tangled. It's incredibly expensive compared to other countries and other healthcare systems. And one of the ways that we can help is by increasing access to care, especially in preventative healthcare models, and allowing the masses to have better access to care via diagnostic results. So absolutely, I think using technology to access diagnostics and making it less cumbersome is only going to improve quality of care for an individual from their standpoint, as well as from a public health perspective.
Interesting. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to The Virtual Shift. I'm your host, Tom Foley. We have a great guest on today, Randy Erspamer, Commercial Director of Growth at Chronomics. Chronomics providing a bioinfrastructure and an innovative approach towards doing diagnostics in the home. Hopefully, I summarized that correctly there, Randy. So let's talk a little bit about your last comments, and let me focus in a bit on cost. It's the ultimate model, right? How do I reimagine the delivery of care and better take advantage of the resources that are available and reduce the cost in the process, but not giving up on the one element that's an absolute, and that is we can't give up on the level of quality of that care, because at the end of the day, it is about someone's health, right? So when all is said and done, quality cannot suffer, but we can do a much better job of aligning our resources and reducing our costs. So relative to the service that Chronomics offers in the home, talk to us a little bit about how you can impact the cost equation.
Yep, sure. Great question. So there's a multifaceted answer to your question. So when it comes to mobile phlebotomy, or brick and mortar phlebotomy, which our bioinfrastructure platform can connect our clientele to, that is fully reimbursable by insurance via traditional methods. So an individual could have a physician order a test for them, present themselves to any number of phlebotomy draw stations, and have blood drawn or urine specimen collected, or whatever the specimen type may be. And that is traditionally or historically widely accepted to be reimbursable by private insurance, as well as federal or state. One interesting area that I think at-home collection devices are still very far in front of is the regulatory landscape and payer environment. So to date, we have not seen payers widely accepting self-collection kits for reimbursement from insurance. And I think that's just a matter that the market hasn't caught up with it yet. We've really seen, as I mentioned earlier, an explosion of growth from at-home diagnostics post-COVID. And most households are very comfortable with doing an at-home collection now via swab because of COVID-19. And because of COVID tests were required to be reimbursable by the federal government. So we saw that shift. However, the rest of the test types have not caught up with that same level of legislation or regulatory rule yet. So today, at-home collection devices are still going to be self-pay. There are instances for value-based care where they can be reimbursable on a value-based care contract, where we've worked with different clientele that have used it for that. So if you can use a FIT test, for example, which checks for the presence of hemoglobin in stool, potentially you could show a link to colorectal cancer is what those tests are commonly used for, and other value-based care type of tests. And if you can show that you are catching disease states earlier than you would have otherwise, there are incentives there that are outside of the traditional CPT code or pay per test type of model. So there are pathways for reimbursement for self-collection devices, but right now I think we're still a few years out from seeing them being more regulated and therefore being more widely accepted by payers for reimbursement.
So if a consumer wants to do self-pay, or if a payer wants to step in front of their provider network and provide direct care, and those would be the most viable segments of the market that would provide that reimbursement, right? Consumer can certainly pay with their health savings account, through their health savings account, cash pay, or concierge service could ultimately adopt this new innovative approach, because they too have to find ways of reducing the cost of care and without putting a great financial burden on the consumer in which they're treating. So what do you think when you say a couple of years, I always get a little annoyed or angry, only because this market needs to move faster than that, right? And then if there's one thing the healthcare market hasn't done in years, hence the reason why we are last to adopt technology, is that it just doesn't move fast enough. Thoughts on that?
Sure. Great question. I think it's really just getting a story out there, right? Like accelerating. I think most people are cognizant of the fact that the U.S. healthcare system is incredibly inflated from a cost perspective, as well as just tangled and slow to evolve. And I think we need to get the story out, right? So I think we need to talk to our legislative leaders. The FDA is also cognizant, I think, that we need to move faster. And it just comes to getting the story out that self-collection devices showing the data that self-collection devices can improve quality of care, catch disease states earlier, have a cost savings to the healthcare system from a public health perspective because of this. And also, if we allow access to diagnostics to be more widespread, or more people to have access to taking a preventative diagnostic to check their health, costs are going to go down, right? So, I mean, we've seen it even with like mapping the human genome from next-gen sequencing. In 2003, it cost $3 billion to map the human genome. In 2019, it was less than $1,000. And a McKinsey report that recently came out said that by 2030, it's going to be less than $100 to map the human genome. So we have improvements in technology that are driving down costs. Volume, of course, in the lab business is going to drive down costs. And at the end of the day, it'll become much more efficient for payers to realize that an at-home collection device, when looking at the data, is going to improve public health, and it'll be better for them to pay it up front.
Is the cost coming down because, to your point, the awareness of the effectiveness of the service and the adoption of the service is going up, hence the need for the acceleration? Or is it still truly our legislators or our regulatory agencies need to be more aggressive in changing policies?
Yeah, I mean, that's a complicated answer that we could spend a whole session on, I think it's a combination, right? So of course, there's always like the research and technology, like the R&D that goes into any new product is just going to be very front loaded. And then the cost is going to go down over time. Like we see that across the pharmaceutical industry, diagnostic industry, very common. But yeah, I think it's a combination, right? Really, at the end of the day, it's up to us as an industry to show the payers that it makes sense for them to reimburse at-home diagnostics from a cost perspective, because it drives up engagement, it's easier to access, and the list goes on.
Yeah, well, so let's take a look at history, right? History in 2009 said the HITECH Act reinvented healthcare providers may not agree with that but at the end of the day, we went from paper to through the adoption of electronic medical records. Fast forward, that investment, one would argue, we could not have gotten through COVID as well as we did if our health records were still on paper. So the doctor can be remote just as much as the patient can be remote. And if it wasn't for the administration at the time, in this case, it was the Trump administration, not trying to get political here, but at the end of the day, they are the ones that eliminated all the regulatory constraints that allowed telehealth to be viable. Because without that, before that, we had where you could do telehealth, but you had to go to a facility in order to engage the provider who was on the other side of the health system, right? So telehealth became a new world order, if you will, only because we changed regulatory. So again, I'm not here to bash the regulators, but it does seem that one, our government could be a better investor in allowing us to reimagine the delivery of care much faster through the power of investment, physical money, actual money, as well as the change in regulatory. Because services like yours actually does have value and does change the model, give greater satisfaction, and doesn't impinge upon the quality measure, right? So your thoughts?
Yeah, I 100% agree, Tom. I think it is a fine line, but of course, allowing regulators to look at the data at home diagnostics and using technology to improve quality of care for our country and decrease costs is probably one of the highest priorities of the decade, at least in my mind, and I imagine in yours too. And regulators have a great responsibility to look at the data and make decisions quickly while also maintaining a high level of quality of care, right? So it's a fine line. And typically what we find, or if you look historically, when things become regulated, it allows things to flourish, but to a certain line, right? You don't want to over-regulate, but you also don't want to under-regulate, because then quality can suffer and sharks can get in the water, if you will, to try to make a dollar while not looking at the end result, which at the end of the day, our business, people's lives are in our hands. So it's crucial that we get it right.
So let's move off the regulators. We love them. For those folks that work in healthcare that are listening to this program and say, "Hey, I want to engage Chronomics." Certainly, you're the guy to engage. You can find Randy on LinkedIn for sure. But the point there being is, from a technology perspective, you provide an API interface for any EHR to ultimately allow the order and the results to flow bidirectionally through an EHR order. Is that fair? You want to talk a little bit about what happens on that front?
Yeah, that's correct. So we work across several verticals, from telehealth to health and wellness retailers, sleep, menopause, fertility, gut health, even pet health. So across several verticals, but specifically in telehealth, we can help with the entire end-to-end diagnostic solution, from a provider ordering platform where providers can actually order a test through our platform, which will make an API call to either our warehouse to send out a fulfillment or to fulfill a self-collection kit, or we can help with scheduling an appointment via mobile phlebotomy for a phlebotomist to come to a patient's home, or for them to go to a brick and mortar location. And then they'll obviously collect their sample. If it's at home, we can also, we have our own suite of SDKs that can be used to help with the user registration for the self-collection device, which can be white labeled for any telehealth company. They'll then drop it in the mail if it's that methodology, or if it's the phlebotomist, they'll send it to the laboratory via their logistical means, or ones that we can help facilitate as well. The lab will then process the sample, and then we help with the API call back into electronic health record for the clinician to review, and then have a follow-on with the patient as required. So we help with the entire end-to-end journey, from the tech side of things to the supply chain and logistics, and then finally the lab processing as well.
Awesome. In closing, walk me through the next year or two on where you see this market going.
Yeah, I think I see it accelerating even faster and faster. So I know I've referenced this McKinsey report, the bio revolution, a few times now, but I think they have a very positive outlook, which I tend to agree with, saying that in the next 10 years, they see the healthcare system or this biorevolution causing $2 to $4 trillion in annual economic impact to the United States alone across biomolecules, biosystems, biomachine interfaces, and biocomputing. And most of this money per year is going to be in biomolecules. So looking at cellular processes, whether it's gene therapy for monogenic diseases. Recently, I don't know if you saw the news, but a very interesting study just came out from a new pharmaceutical for colorectal cancer at Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York, where it was a small trial, but all 12 patients are in remission. So there's really exciting things happening in healthcare.
That was very exciting, that report. That we were just talking about that report earlier today, and outstanding. It is just the demonstration of how science and technology is evolving and really changing lives. Folks, not to get off on a tangent here, but those folks took colorectal cancer, no side effects, all in remission. It's just outstanding work.
Absolutely. And we're seeing it time and time again. And the growth rate of innovation is just continuing to accelerate. And I think we're going to see the same in self collection kits for diagnostics, new diagnostics being made available. And it's just going to continue to get more and more exciting. I mean, even with biocomputing, as I mentioned, it's a small portion of that $2 to $4 trillion pie through 2030. But even a new hardware system for computing is going to be in DNA, right? Like Wikipedia was able to map all of their text catalog in the English language to DNA. All 16 gigabytes of text was encoded into DNA in 2019. And we're seeing even evolutions there continue to happen. So what's going to happen in the next decade in healthcare from biomolecules to biocomputing is really exciting. And I think we're just going to see that continue to grow and accelerate.
Awesome. Randy Erspamer, Commercial Director of Growth at Chronomics. You can find them on, I believe it's chronomics.com, chronomics.com. I advise everyone to check them out. They're doing some great work. Hopefully you can integrate it into your health system as well. Randy, thanks for joining us on this program.
Thanks for having me, Tom. It was fun. Take care.
I want to thank the show sponsors, HP. HP Engage Long Lifecycle Products provides the stability, safety, and security you need, plus flexibility and performance designed for today and tomorrow. As well, GenieMD, providing a modular, scalable, and customizable virtual care platform and clinical services to help providers extend care into the home, increasing access and quality while driving new revenue opportunities. If you missed part of today's episode, you can tune in at the same time, 11 a.m. or 7 p.m. Eastern, throughout the week, and be sure to check out the program page on healthcarenowradio.com. And remember, connect or follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter at FoleyTom, and follow the show's hashtag, The Virtual Shift. I'm Tom Foley. Until the next shift.